Good morning and welcome to the May, I guess it is May still, the May luncheon of the Business and Professional Chapter of the John Birch Society. And we're delighted to have such a wonderful crowd today. We have a special program, obviously, and we're just grateful for this beautiful weather and for each of you coming out today. And we're going to start, if you don't mind, go ahead and be standing up. And I've asked Alan Huffines to lead us in our invitation.
Pray with me. Heavenly Father, holy is your name. We bow today in reverence for the mighty God that you are, and in thankfulness for all the blessings we've received. I pray today for all of our Christian brothers and sisters who are being so harshly persecuted in other lands. I pray that you will strengthen them, that their faith will sustain them. And I pray today for the John Birch Society. We do believe that with less government, more responsibility, and your help, we can make this a better world. We're thankful for the many officers and leaders who have served so faithfully for so long. Art Thompson, Jack McManus, Larry Waters, Bill Cherry. And we're thankful for the new pullers at the oars that you've inspired. Barbara Harvest, Suzanne Carpenter, Nancy True, Charles Casey, Brent Smith, Tom Brashear, just a few that come to mind. So many more. And now, Lord, bless our time together. May all that's said and done be pleasing in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. I offer this prayer in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Remain standing, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. I want to mention a couple of items that we have at the table back there for sale. Especially with Art here, we want to emphasize these items. He's the one that is the primary source of information for these. He wrote Shadows of the Deep State, which is for sale back there. It's only $10, and there's a wonderful amount of information in here that names and really explains what the deep state is about. The predecessor to this was Shadows, what was it called?
Shadows of Power.
Shadows of Power, and that for many of us, that little green and white, small, much smaller book than this was a very instrumental in helping us to understand the depths of the deep state, and was very powerful. And this is just an extension of that, and very well done. Along with that, for $1, you can get a reprint of a special edition of the New American that we did a few months ago, entitled The Deep State. And again, this is valuable not only for you, but for $1, it's a great way to buy a few to give to your friends and say, you wondered about the deep state? This will help you understand what it's about. And then, of course, Art's tome. I never had heard the word tome before, but his tome is to the victor go the myths and the monuments. It's a wonderful book. You don't read it in one night, I can tell you that. But it is understandable, and it's readable, and you will be glad that you did if you purchase one of these. Art will be available to sign one of these, as well as the Shadows of the Deep State. If you'll purchase one back there and just grab him after the meeting is over. I do want to just mention briefly a couple of things. This is National Police Week. We do have members in this group that are active with a committee that does its best to keep in touch with what's going on with our local police and helping to keep them independent. That's an important byline to supporting your local police, is the keeping them independent part. This is National Police Week this week. And last night in Washington, D.C., the National Law Enforcement Museum, which is about a year and a half old now, and I encourage any of you to go by and see that museum. It's on the mall. It's actually on the outside of the mall, but it is on the mall. And they've done an excellent job of honoring the people, the men and women that serve to protect us. But last night, more than 30,000 officers, survivors, and supporters gathered on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. at the 31st Annual Candlelight Vigil to remember the 371 law enforcement officers whose names were engraved on the memorial this year. That's how many we lost in this last year. And I encourage you to pick up the material we have back there. We have lots of material on supporting your local police and keeping them independent. You know, when we hear reports or read emails from people that are knowledgeable, like Barbara and Suzanne and others that keep in touch with our state legislators, it's very discouraging. Very discouraging right now the way our state legislators are not working, not enacting legislation. It's just really sad. There's one bill, Senate Bill 9. Kurt Hyde was informing me that the best way we can do it is call and ask them. They're going to be tomorrow. There's going to be a conciliatory get-together to decide if it's going to be voted on, and it needs to be passed as it was originally written in the Senate. In the last 24 hours, there's been a lot of the teeth stripped out of it, meaning the teeth that I'm talking about are the ways to go back and check and do a recount with any validity at all. They've taken all the teeth out of that. So there's no way to validate, that's the word, to validate the voting. And so we really needed to pass as it was originally written in the state Senate. So give your senator in Austin a call and ask them to get to work on that. But with that, I am going to ask visitors in the room. We have several, the first timers or visitors today, and I would like to begin over here. Matt will be introduced in a few minutes, and just go around the table here. If you're a first timer, stand up or introduce your guest, either one. Okay. Yes, Alan.
I want to introduce my friend Alan Clark. He's been here before, very distinguished gentleman. Hope you'll stay welcome to him.
He is a very distinguished gentleman. Alan, we're thankful that you're here today. Other first-time people, yes?
So it's my second time, but I'm Seth Ethington. I came on my own again.
You know, Seth Ethington is a very sharp young man, the kind of person that we need in our organization, and we're very delighted that he's back with us today for a special day. Other new people, first timers. Yes.
Name's Philip Morgan, first time visitor. So
Great to have you here. Nice to have you here. We'll recognize everybody in just a minute. Those are the Applewhites back there, for those of you that haven't met them in about a year or so, but we're glad they're here today. Well, let's give a hand to those new people that are here today. You're welcome at any time, and Bill, I'm going to let you come up and do the introductions now of our speakers.
Well, we appreciate you all being here today. We have quite a compressed program this morning, so we're going to move right into it. And I want to make just a few short announcements, and then we'll have a couple legislative reports, and we'll go into the program. As some of you know, Alex Newman is going to be through Texas in August, and we have his schedule here. We'll put these on the back table for you. He'll be speaking, I think the closest he'll get to Dallas is in the Temple area. A lot of the speeches, his talks are going to be in South Texas. And there's also a copy of a letter written by one of our members in Georgia that she wrote to her elected representatives about the dangers of this new NAFTA agreement. And I thought the way she wrote the letter and how the points she made on it were really good. So we'll put some copies on that in the back if you want to pick these up and use them as a guideline. And they'll be on the back table when you leave. As you know, we're involved in the battle on the NAFTA Trade Pact, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And Suzanne Carpenter has been giving us updates on that and keeping us current on it. And so I'm going to ask Suzanne if she'll come forward and bring us up to date on where that fight stands right now.
Thank you, Bill. I hope everyone got my handout. If you didn't, let me know. I'll give you one. The latest news is on April 29th, Mexico's Senate has passed the highly anticipated labor reform bill, and the U.S. lawmakers regard this as essential to the implementation of the USMCA. And once Mexico's president, Obrador, signs this bill into law, Mexico expects that the United States Congress will introduce a USMCA Implementation Act within a month to be voted on in early summer of this year. So we really need to call and be on guard about this. And if the U.S. passes and implements the USMCA and Mexico ratifies it, of course, Mexico calls it what it rightfully is, a treaty. Then Canada is expected to ratify it as a treaty towards the end of this year in order for it to go into effect in January of 2020. And of course, USMCA is total deception. It's not about free trade. The objective is to further integrate the economies of all three of our countries on top of what has already been achieved by NAFTA into a singular North American Union, just like the European Union. And like NAFTA, it establishes in Chapter 30 a Free Trade Commission, which is a bureaucratic group that will govern us. We will no longer be governed by elected officials. And it's identical to the governing commission that was in the TPP that Trump hated so much. In fact, Richard Haas had said it's very, very similar to TPP. It also gives this Free Trade Commission, it's established as a living agreement, much like the TPP, allowing it to change the agreement without the approval of Congress. We only need to look across the pond at our British friends as they failed to heed the warnings years ago by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher when she said concerning the loss of British sovereignty to a centralized and authoritative European Union. She was very prophetic in these warnings, and we know that the European Union has grown increasingly centralized and authoritative, very authoritative, so much so that in 2016, the British public voted to exit the EU and Brexit. Nigel Farage is now the new leader of the Brexit Party, which, by the way, is #1 in the polls in Britain. And he stated that their current dishonest Prime Minister, Theresa May's proposal to exit the Brexit deal may well leave Britain trapped inside the European Union's customs union in perpetuity. What has happened with the United Kingdom in regard to the 2016 Brexit vote should send powerful shockwaves to all Americans concerning these so-called deceptive free trade agreements, particularly the USMCA, which could very well leave Americans trapped inside a North American Union with Canada and Mexico in perpetuity. And Nigel Farage's party is #1 in the polls in Britain, meaning the majority of Britons are against Brexit, but they still can't extricate themselves from the European Union. Hopefully Americans will learn from this experience. It's much easier to enter into a sovereignty-killing trade agreement than it is to exit one. We must extricate ourselves from all of these entanglements, such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organizations. So please call your senators, your representatives, President Trump. We've got to put pressure on Congress and the President to kill this USMCA. And thank you, Barbara Harless, this week informed me that our wonderful Texas legislators, who Barbara's going to tell us about in a second, Tan Parker, Republican, has passed a resolution declaring to Congress to please pass USMCA, and it passed 130-0 in the Texas House. And it's a resolution, so I don't think, according to Barbara, it doesn't have to go to the Senate. It's just a public declaration. I'll put talking points. You can use a couple of them to call your congressman and President Trump, but please call. We must stop this USMCA. Thanks.
Well, we're coming down to the final couple of weeks of the Texas legislature, and of course it's mass chaos. And you soon realize what the true meaning of monkey shines means, and what's going on in the legislature right now, and what they're doing to some of the bills. And to keep us up to date on a couple of important bills, Barbara Harless, who's been involved in the North Texas Watchdog Committee, will update on us on these bills. Barbara?
Well, for those of you that were here last month, or was it March? I can't remember what month it was. I've been concentrating mainly on the school mental health bills, trying to turn our schools into mental health care providers. I gave you a handout. I don't like to deliver bad information or bad news without giving you an opportunity, a door to open to try to address it and remedy it. So I gave you a handout. There's 11 bad mental health bills that have to do with your local public school, your elementary schools. And where they are as of 7:30 this morning, I had to update the list. These are the 11 mental health bills that appear to be moving quickly, and they are the ones that will pass. All of your House bills are listed at the top. The Senate bills are listed down at the bottom. I have action to take over on the right-hand side. Please contact your senator or your Texas House representative and ask them to vote against any of these bill numbers when it comes to their chamber's floor. You can contact the committee members, but I think at this point in time, your best efforts are spent on your elected official. I would like to mention, how many people in here are in Angela Paxton's Senate district? Okay, well, Angela voted in favor of House Bill 18 there at the top and House Bill 906 last Thursday. I wish that you would call her and ask her what it is that she likes about those mental health care bills. I don't believe that she's reading these. And I texted her, I've been talking to Michelle Smith, I've given them all the information, I've summarized the bills, and they still vote for them. So I would really appreciate somebody else adding their voice into it to help back me up. I've done my research, these are bad, bad bills. And then on the second page, that's stapled to that, it gives you reasons to oppose House Bill 18, which is also on your list, and it goes into detail. Each bill is a little bit different. But generally speaking, what they're doing is they're opening up our university psychiatric departments to have unfettered access to our children at your local public school campus to do research and training for their residents, for their students. Well, psychiatry involves drugs. And almost every school, this is all done in the name of school safety, because the governor, it's his emergency priority. He's going to make sure that he gets, these bills passed. Well, if almost every school shooter has had a history of psychotropic drug use, how much sense does it make to drug our kids even more? So, and then at the bottom of the first page there, I have my website, ntcl.org. I've posted 6 articles on these bills. So if you want to refresh, your memory on the talking points, which I gave you when I made a presentation a month ago, please go there. But have a dialogue with your elected official and tell them that you oppose this. And when the primary season comes around, we need to be taking names and remember what's going on and share the information. And here's one more thing that I wanted to mention. House Bill 4183, which is on your list, just to give you an idea that I didn't go over, that bill defines adverse childhood experiences. Every single person in here could be identified as having an adverse childhood experience. It even lists in the bill here, abuse and neglect as defined by another chapter in the Health and Human Services statute. It includes, let's see, I pulled out the important stuff. A child that experiences death of a parent, parental separation or divorce, mental or emotional injury, that's an open definition, physical injury or threat of injury, excluding responsible discipline. Well, who's going to define what's responsible? Failure to prevent physical harm to a child, allowing use of controlled substance, and then neglect includes a whole plethora of other things that everyone in here could probably be guilty of. So please have a dialogue with just your 2 elected officials and tell them what you think about a dragnet being allowed to be put over our local public schools to assess our children. Thank you.
And I think after listening to Barbara, you look at these bills, you can see the fine line here for what they're trying to do, and then going into a complete political correctness operation in order to control the thinking and the politics and the issues through the school system. We're going to have a drawing after the speakers, so don't rush off after our speakers. And we do have our project of the month, and it's a continuation of our project that we had, we started last month, and that is to get our account built up where we could buy some radio advertising on some of the talk shows to urge people to contact their representatives to get them to vote against this USMCA agreement. And radio advertising a little higher in the Dallas area, and we need to have a pretty good war chest to do this. So I'm going to pass the form around where you can help on this. If you want to write a check, just make it at the seminar, flip it to the board. If you want to leave cash, just make a notation, put your name and how much cash, and flip it to the board too. Or if you want a billing, just give us your name and address and check off how much you want a billing for it, and we'll send you a billing for it also. So we'll start it around this way. Dennis, if you could get this going around, I appreciate it. Well, our first speaker is somebody that we have met before, and of course we read about him every month in the bulletin of the John Birch Society. He's done just about everything a person can do in the John Birch Society, from being a member, a chapter leader, section leader, going on to the staff of the John Birch Society, heading up our development department, and later becoming the CEO of the John Birch Society. He has also an extensive business career. He built his own companies, and one of the companies that he had took him to Europe quite often, and he used his time over there to do a lot of research over the years he was over there, and that's how this Myth and Monuments book came about, from the extensive research he would do crawling through the libraries in different parts of Europe, digging up the research. And there's a wealth of information in that book, so keep at your fingertips all the time. It'll fill in a lot of gaps for you about why certain things have happened over the years and what could be happening in the future too. And just like he says, the winners are going to write history. And we want to do our best to make sure that our side writes the history here in the future. I've worked with him for a number of years. I've got to appreciate not only his business knowledge, but his extensive knowledge on what we're faced with today. He's been a great plus to John Birch Society. I'm proud to introduce to you Mr. Arthur Thompson.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be back. Could be anywhere. For all the rumors you may have heard about my health, they're all true. Well, we're going to talk about the deep state. Now, the thing about the deep state is that there's a plethora of books out there with deep state in the titles. There's one thing wrong with them, they don't talk about it. What they talk about are the individuals who are involved in all of these shenanigans behind the scenes. You know, that you see on Hannity and Lou Dobbs and all of that. But they never ever talk about anyone beyond that. What organizations, what individuals are buried within the deep state? They remain completely aloof from that. And they have a way of not getting to the nub, the real issue in many of these things that they talk about on television and radio. For instance, can you recall a single pundit, conservative, on the radio or television that once discussed the issue of sovereignty during the debates over getting rid of NAFTA? It was a bad deal. Well, you can always recover from a bad economy. You cannot recover from the loss of sovereignty. And yet that was the important thing, the big secret, the elephant in the room that no one wanted to talk about. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So really, what is the deep state? Essentially, it is the organization that wields major influence to a level of control over the affairs of American society and beyond. Now let's get into some background from some of our former leaders and famous people that kind of get into what we're going to be talking about and lay the basis down for understanding. I apologize for having to quote this man, but he did say a few interesting things. And one of them, in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. These are not mistakes. These are not fumbles. People plan what goes on in politics, or they do not happen. And if they do happen, it was organized to happen that way. But what type of organization is involved in these things? Well, for one thing, let's quote two famous British prime ministers and what they had to say about it. For instance, Benjamin Disraeli. In a speech that he gave in 1870, he said, "The governments of the present day have to deal not merely with other governments, with emperors, kings, and ministers, but also with the secret societies, which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents and can at the last moment upset all the government's plans." Have you ever heard an American leader say that we have to deal with secret societies and they really can mess things up? Winston Churchill got a little more specific. In an article he wrote in February of 1920, he said, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt, who founded the secret order of the Illuminati on May 1st, 1776, to those of Karl Marx, the worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and the reconstruction of society on the basis of arrested development or envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century." He claims that all subversive movements in the 1800s came out of the Illuminati. The Carbonari, the Communists, the Socialist movement, all the rest of them, all sprang out of the Illuminati. That's not something that I learned in my civics class in high school. Nor did I learn it in college. Nor did I learn it anywhere until Robert Welch started talking about it, the founder of the John Birch Society. Now, Frederick Engels, I should have had that up on the screen, I apologize. Frederick Engels was the partner of Karl Marx. They wrote many things together, including the Communist Manifesto. And he stated that the communist movement was based on the extension of the French Illuminist secret societies above the rank and file of the general membership. In other words, a secret conspiracy ran the open Communist Party without the rank and file members recognizing that. And you can find that out in the November 12 through 26, 1885, for those of you who may be taking notes, Social Democrat. And it's archived in the Marx and Engels Selected Works in Moscow, 1970. Another book that they wrote together, of course, was The Holy Family. Now, The Holy Family was written 3 years before they wrote the Communist Manifesto. And they said in there, this is a quote, "The revolutionary movement which began in 1789 in the Cercle Social gave rise to the communist idea, reintroduced in France after the Revolution of 1830. This is the idea of the New World Order." Now, this is the first time that I can find that they used that phraseology. And they said it was the communist idea. So when you hear people using this particular phrase, keep in mind, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels said it was the communist idea. In the Communist Manifesto, they really tell us what the goal of the conspiracy is. This is a quote, "They, the communists, openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions." Now, to what end? It is to overthrow society. Marx and Engels knew that only by changing society could they be successful. Every society decides on its form of government. Change that society, and the government will change automatically. Another thing is, too, if you have a successful revolution and you did not change the society, that society can have a counter-revolution and come back and put you against the wall. So the revolutionaries knew they had to change society in order to have a successful new world order. Now, they set down goals in the Communist Manifesto of how to change society, but they boiled down to two primary overriding goals, and they are a one world government they call the New World Order, of course, to be run by them, and the abolition of God to be replaced by the state. Now, usually that replacement is the leader. Now, the state controls everything, but they put up a leader, maybe a Hitler or a Mao or a Stalin or somebody like that. But the organization changes society. And they may zig and zag, go hither and yon, change issues and that sort of thing, but they never lose sight of these two goals: a one world government and the abolition, getting rid of God out of everything. Now, the Communist Manifesto then tells us they need to overthrow society, and every society determines its form of government. Change society, and its form of government will change automatically. Now, the Communist Manifesto delineates how they're going to do this. And they outline 10 primary steps in the manifesto for achieving their aims. And these are designed for the most advanced European countries at the time. They've added a couple of things later on, which we'll get into. But if you take a look at what they outlined to do in order to change society, step one was the abolition of all private property. Nobody was to own anything. It was all to be owned by the state, and the rents of that property were to be applied to the state projects, etc. Now, let me ask you a question. If you rent and you don't pay your rent, what happens to you? You're evicted. You own and you don't pay your taxes on that property, what happens to you? What's the difference? What is the difference? There is none. But we've been fooled into thinking that we actually own this piece of property. the classic sense of ownership, we no longer own anything. We have changed into step one to a large extent in a peaceful manner, and everybody goes along happily repaying over and over and over and over for that property. And they may be allowed to pass it on to their children. They may not. Step two, a graduated income tax. Well, we've got that, don't we? It used to be illegal to have an income tax in this country. The Constitution was written so that the federal government could not directly tax a citizen or business. Why? Because our founders knew that that was a power over the citizenry. The power to tax is the power to control. And so they had to have an amendment to the Constitution in order to do that. Massive immigration and a lot of education in the public schools finally were able to pass that amendment and a couple of others to completely overturn the nature of the Constitution. Number three, abolition of all rights of inheritance. Now this will vary from administration to administration. Trump has eased this considerably. But I knew men who were farmers and ranchers that lost their property because of the land value, but they were cash poor. That according to the value of their land, they were millionaires, but they hardly made any money. And so because they were millionaires, they were taxed off the land. I've seen it happen. The confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels, that was only enforced during the Civil War. Step five, very important one, a central bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. What is that? Federal Reserve. Both the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and the direct election of senators happened at the same time. The direct election of senators was different than other countries, and so it was not included in the Communist Manifesto. But getting rid of the legislatures appointing the senators to the Senate kicked the legs out of the Republic. And I can elaborate on it at length, but the states were no longer represented in the federal government because they were elected by the people, not the state governments. You still have 2 senators, but they don't go to the legislature to get elected. And they used to have to come home and answer to the legislature as for their actions. If a budget went over, the federal budget, they'd done every state proportionate to their population for that overage. Well, the legislature had to come up with that money, and they weren't very happy about it. So getting the House budget through the Senate was a very difficult rite of passage. And so that stopped. Not only did that completely stop, it reversed itself. With the income tax, now the federal government had more money. So the states came and begged the federal government for money to where today, most states in the United States are financed 30% by the federal government. Some of them have. And you wonder why you can't get these legislators to stand up to the federal government. They like the money. Step 6, centralization of all means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Well, again, control is more important than ownership, is it not? We know that by the property. You can't buy and operate a means of communication in the United States without the okay of the federal government. You can't. You got to go through the FCC. And the same way with truckers and everything else. They're all controlled by the government. Let's skip down until step 10, just to cut this short. Free education in all public schools. Also, which I don't have up on the screen, is the fact that they said also we want to eliminate child labor in its present form. Doesn't say eliminate all child labor, period. It says eliminate all child labor in its present form. It's okay if it's run by the state, but it's not okay if it's run by private enterprise. That's the difference. And the communists have always wanted to engage the children in testing to determine what they were going to do as adults. Now you can become a scientist, you're going to be a farmer, you're going to sweep the streets, and for the rest of their life, that's where they're educated to do. They have no choice. There have been other steps promoted after the publication of the manifesto For instance, free trade. Now that is anybody here against free trade? I'm not against free trade, I'm for free trade. The problem is that the minute the government's involved with its regulations and its laws, it no longer is free, is it? It's government control. Doesn't matter what the title is on the agreement. It's no longer free. It's agreement within the bounds of government control. Another one is immigration. There's never been a time in human history that mass immigration into a country has not changed that country and its government. You can't show me a single instance where that's not happened. That's what's happening to our country. Immigration is changing our society. It's happening to Europe as well. The elimination of God in public life. We see that steadily, don't we? Take this cross down, take those 10 commandments away from the legislature, so on and so forth. War memorials, they're even talking about taking the crosses off the graves now, not just the one at the entrance. It's ridiculous. And the deterioration of morality. And part of the deterioration of morality is the sense of responsibility. Responsibility is a part of morality. People no longer take responsibility to the level they used to, not only for their personal actions, for their kids, their businesses, but to do what's right simply because it's right. The sin of omission. And that's what's getting our country into a lot of trouble. So recapping, we see, okay. So we see that the communist conspiracy, the communism is a conspiracy. And they want to change society into a one world government, and they utilize several techniques to carry their agenda forward. Now, these things happen to be in the 20th century in the United States. The formation of a central bank, direct taxation of the United States citizenry, the neutering of the United States Senate, and also the building up of and creation of Bolshevik Russia. Now, this is supposed to be, says, into 20th century America. What's 20th century America got to do with Bolshevik Russia? A great deal. Communist Russia would not exist if it wasn't for Americans, period. The federal government, the Federal Reserve, was ostensibly formed to stabilize our economy and the banks. Under their watch, we've had 2 market crashes, a Great Depression, and several recessions, including the Great Recession of 2008. In addition, the Federal Reserve started with $1 in circulation that was worth 100 cents. Today in purchase power, it's only worth 2 cents of the 1914 dollar. What you could buy with 2 cents in 1914 takes 50 cents to buy today in gold. And by the way, equal weight of gold of purchasing something in 1914 has not changed to purchasing the same commodity today. It takes the same amount of gold, but it takes 50 times the dollars to do the same thing. They through inflation, have stripped wealth from the American people over a period of time, nearly a century. If it had been done in a couple of years, there would have been a revolt. But they gradually sucked us wealth out of the country in that manner. Now, we know that this is plank 5 of the Communist Manifesto. 3 of the 7 men who founded the Fed became Council on Foreign Relations members, 2 of them founders of the CFR. Paul Warburg of Kuhn Loeb Bank, Rothschild, he was a Rothschild agent in the United States, and Charles D. Norton of J.P. Morgan Bank. Also, we had a very interesting group come along right about at the same time that Russia the Bolsheviks had their revolution. It's called the American League to Aid and Cooperate with Russia. The president of it was Dr. Frank Goodenough, Johns Hopkins, the head of Johns Hopkins University, and a member of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. The first 2 vice presidents were William Boyce Thompson of the Federal Reserve of New York and Oscar S. Strauss, former Secretary of Commerce under Teddy Roosevelt, founding members of the Council on Foreign Relations. In other words, these were the kinds of people mixed up in the founding of Communist Russia and also founding the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, the first meeting of the American League to aid and cooperate with Russia was held in the Senate office of Senator Robert L. Owen of Oklahoma. He just happened to be the sponsor of the Federal Reserve Act. The 10 men who would become members of the CFR were on its board of this organization to help Lenin and Trotsky. The Wilson State Department, the War Trade Board, recommended closer ties to Soviet Russia. 2 of the 3 board members became founders of the CFR. Thomas L. Chadbourne, multinational corporation lawyer, and John Foster Dulles, who later became Dwight Eisenhower's Secretary of State. These are the kinds of people involved in promoting Bolshevik Russia. Also, the founding of Soviet Russia included the American Red Cross. My stepdad returned from the South Pacific after the war, and we would never, ever give a dime to the Red Cross from what he saw of what they did in the South Pacific. Coffee and donuts, but you had to pay for it. All contributed, on the boxes, contributed by the American people and all that. But at any rate, this is probably the most unsavory aspect of the Red Cross. William Boyce Thompson of the Federal Reserve of New York headed up, was pretty much the head, working head. He didn't have the title, but he was kind of the working head of that particular mission to Bolshevik Russia. Major Allen Wardwell, a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the secret society Scroll and Key at Yale, and vice president of the American-Russian Chamber of Commerce, who was involved in actually heading up that Red Cross delegation. During World War II, he was the head of the Russian War Relief, and at the same time, president of the New York Bar Association. You wonder what's wrong with some attorneys. Now, go back just one more to add. William Boyce Thompson, by the way, gave $1 million to Lenin. That's $40 million today of his own personal money when he was there in Russia. You can read online, and you can read it in my book. We got a copy here somewhere, whatever. And in the shadows of the deep state, I get into more detail as to these individuals helping these communists consolidate control in Moscow. Americans, rich guys. Now, Edward Mendel House was the primary organizer under Wilson of the internationalist agenda that President Wilson had. He wrote a book anonymously called Philip Drew Administrator, and he quotes a man on the title page, Giuseppe Mazzini. Now, Giuseppe Mazzini was the head of the Carbonari of Europe, and he was only one man separated from Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati. This is how close that, it was a second generation Illuminist organization. And House quoted this guy on his front title page in the book. Leon Trotsky stated that Carbonari was the left-wing extension of the Illuminati in his biography, My Life. I wish he'd told us what the right wing was. But at any rate, House became Wilson's alter ego. He stayed at the White House, actually lived there without pay. He did not want to be named as a cabinet officer because he would have had to have been confirmed by the Senate, and he didn't want to have anybody know what he was doing. But he was working for Wilson, but actually much of what was going on was House, not Wilson himself. They finally fell out at the end of the Paris peace talks, but at any rate, you'll find that story in the book. Now, the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations was formed out of the failure to ratify the Paris Peace Treaty. We were the only ones that didn't pass it. And part of that was the League of Nations. We're the only government that didn't go into the League of Nations, because the American people had not been educated enough yet to accept a one world government and to give up the sovereignty of the United States. The only country. And so the primary purpose of founding the Council on Foreign Relations was to create the atmosphere in the United States for the American people to accept globalism, to accept a one world government, the New World Order. The founding members, such as John Foster Dulles, believed that treaties trump the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I got that in my book. It quotes from his talks. Thus formulating the use of the free trade agenda towards globalism. If these agreements, if these treaties, as Canada and Mexico are calling the USMCA, trump the Constitution by practice, not legally, but by practice, then they can put things in there that just completely abrogates the whole principle of the Republic. We quote his statement to the effect of the meeting at the Kentucky Bar Association just months before President Eisenhower asked him to become Secretary of State, where he said that treaties even trump the Bill of Rights. Now mull that one over for a minute. You're saying to me, Mr. Dulles, that this treaty can annul the Second Amendment, freedom of speech, etc.? That's what he said. And they all stood and clapped. The Council on Foreign Relations became the main interlocking organization of the globalists. For instance, the Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, Atlantic Council, Foreign Policy Association, Brookings, and many more are led by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. In fact, if you take a look at their control over the media, now you can't see this very well on the screen, but if you've got good eyes, you can read it in my book. It shows the interlocking between the Council on Foreign Relations and two sister organizations controlling all of the media, including Fox. Murdoch, who owns Fox, is a member of the Atlantic Council, whose goal it is to merge North America with the EU. That's his goal. And he owns Fox. And you wonder why certain things aren't discussed on some of these programs. We outline in the book, for instance, that the CFR has control of our foreign policy, our military, our no-win wars, education, free trade agreements, and immigration. They control it completely. You wonder why certain Republicans really are rather slow about doing anything about the border. It's because they're internationalists. They do not want the border closed. They don't want a border, period. They are also behind Common Core. Most people who are in the Common Core fight in education had no idea that that came out of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the person who led that for the Council was Condoleezza Rice, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Aspen Institute, and the Trilateral Commission. Very attractive lady, and a lot of snakes are. Now, the program of the Council on Foreign Relations is actually the Communist Manifesto. If you break it all down and look at what these members in the CFR have done over the years, they have been implementing the Communist Manifesto. Now, not all members of the CFR are in on the deal. And many have quit over the years trying to expose what's going on, but they've never really had a good hearing. And so, if you take a look at it, you can't say that the CFR is implementing it, but the members are. So they remain kind of immune. Now here is a half-page obituary of the New York Times for a guy by the name of Richard Gardner. Now this audience, many of you know who Richard Gardner was. if I'm delivering this talk amongst a very large audience of people who are not really steeped in all of this, nobody knows who Richard Gardner is. Why would he garner a half-page obituary in the New York Times? Well, because he was a very important guy in the Council on Foreign Relations. And he wrote an article back in their magazine, Foreign Affairs, in April 1974, where he said, don't expect instant world government. Instead, what we have to do is an end run around sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece. In other words, patient gradualism. And so that's how important this guy was. And nobody had any idea in the general public of this guy and the strategy. In this article, he went through a litany of organizations and initiatives that could transfer power to the United Nations. We'll get back to this in just a second. He said the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which became the World Trade Organization, WTO. The Law of the Sea, or LOST. This could be used. And a variety of programs that would provide solutions to various crises and environmental problems. The strategy to submerge, here I had that on there, I should have clicked this, sorry. But these are the things that he included that could be used in his article to erode United States sovereignty. Now, the head of the CFR today is Richard N. Haas. And he tweeted right after the USMCA was made public, and he said the USMCA is NAFTA. In other words, we're not getting rid of NAFTA. He says it is NAFTA plus TPP, plus a few tweaks. So it's even worse than the one we're getting rid of. It also creates a free trade commission, which will have control over exports and imports, tariffs, financial services, etc. In other words, our economy. What does the Constitution say? The Constitution says that Congress will regulate trade with foreign nations, not a free trade commission. They called it the European Commission when they started, and look what it is today. And they're calling this one the Free Trade Commission. In other words, our economy. And by the way, well, before I get into that, let's say this. One vote in each country. In other words, the three countries have a representative to this Free Trade Commission. Now, how will other treaties affect Mexican and Canadian votes? Mexico and Canada already have an agreement with the EU. How are those obligations with that and other treaties going to reflect in their vote on this Free Trade Commission when we have not entered into any agreement with the EU, although Lighthizer is doing that right now? And let's say what happens after the Trump administration. How will a future U.S. representative vote? How would you like to have an Obama representative on this board with Canada and Mexico? We're getting in, let's let this sink in for a minute. We're getting into a free trade agreement with a corrupt country run by a Marxist, Mexico, and a socialist country called Canada. Does this really make sense? It will operate a new environmental committee to achieve the United Nations Agenda 21-2030 objective of sustainable development. Sustainable development is mentioned several times in the USMCA. One that is not mentioned, but is very pertinent, is that the North American Energy Integration, this is a report, North American Energy Integration, issued by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which tells us that they are forming a consortium with all of the energy of North America out of the hands of the United States. That includes oil, gas, nuclear, you name it. Now, interestingly, Mexico had inserted into the USMCA that they will not be subjected to any controls or regulations over their energy program. Well, why not Canada and the United States? You see, it gets back to this. There's controls that are being implemented over our energy. And Canada and Mexico doesn't like that. So in the agreement, they opted out. This is very brief, but Karl Marx in Brussels, Belgium, in January of 1848 said, "Free trade breaks up old nationalities. In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution." And then he says, "I'm for free trade." Now, it's a little more lengthy than that. I boiled it down a little bit from the verbiage. But you see, Marx understood what free trade does. No protectionism, no tariffs, none of that stuff. We're just going to have open this and that and the other. We're all going to be one big, happy new world order. And he knew that that could be accomplished through free trade. The Free Trade Commission will have control over future changes in the USMCA, and as was told to us earlier. Congress will have no control over it at all. Doesn't need to be resubmitted to Congress. This commission will change this agreement at will and whim. It will also control our borders. You can argue over a wall or no wall or anything else. They will decide who comes across our border and who does not. It's in the agreement. They will have control over labor and everything else coming into our country. It subordinates the United States to the United Nations and its covenant. And there are the things that Richard Gardner talked about. The International Labor Organization, the World Trade Organization, and LOS. The LOS Treaty was never ratified by the Senate because it's so bad. It was never put before the Senate because they knew they couldn't get it passed. Well, they snuck it into this. It will give total control over all the water around the United States and its tributaries. A little something called the Mississippi, the Columbia, the Hudson, that sort of thing. Don't worry. They're benevolent. It is the framework for merging the United States, Mexico, and Canada into a North American Union in the name of free trade. And everybody is all for it because they haven't read it. Now, is the Council on Foreign Relations, well, let me get one other point here. Trump talked about trade at the signing, if you all saw that. Remember? Talking about trade. But the President of Mexico said this, and he said it 4 times. The Mexican-United States and Canada Treaty gives a renewed face toward our integration. You know, there's a big difference between free trade and integration. At any rate, is the Council on Foreign Relations the epicenter of the conspiracy to rule the earth? No, not really. It's just a front. But it's a major coordinating factor for the implementation of the goals of the conspiracy. As I said, not every member is in on the game, and they only serve as dupes. Some of them stay in it because they get very prestigious jobs as a result of their membership. They get in front of the camera on a major network. They get a prestigious chair at a university, so on and so forth. But the CFR comprises the deep state that influences all of American society, changing it from its founding principles to what we have been seeing happening in America for decades. It's not enough to expose what's happening. It's not enough to expose what's happening. Who is causing it to happen is equally as important. We have to identify people so that people understand what is really going on. Now, some people find it hard to believe this story. J. Edgar Hoover specifically addressed this problem, and this is the kind of quote why J. Edgar Hoover, like so many people, are maligned today by the liberal-controlled press and media. He said this back in 1956. Yet the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. People can't get their head around it. How many times have you seen people just can't believe that a conspiracy like this exists? They just can't. And Hoover addressed that. Now, we've just skipped over very, very lightly the involvement of CFR members. And we go into the details and names of scores of people who are involved in subversion against the Constitution and the freedom of the American people in the book. It also has a current list of CFR members in the back, so as you're watching TV, you can look them up. Even some of the best conservatives on television have CFR members as commentators and guests without identifying them as such. And keep in mind that you can argue a very good, sound economic argument, but you can still be an internationalist and wanting to subvert the United States. So it's up to us to inform ourselves and in turn educate our friends and families, peers, etc. And too many do it without referring to the names. We have to also address the names. So it's time to expose just who and what is going on. So thank you. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and he's a delightful fellow. Matt Shea is a state representative in the state of Washington. Has had what, 4 terms now? 5 terms. Matt is out of all the thousands, I think it's close to 7,000 legislators in the United States. Of all of them, he is the only guy who is smeared in the media, coast to coast, and internationally. Congratulations. They know the potential of this man, and they want to try and diminish that potential before he gets into better, more responsible positions. And I think you'll see by some of the stories he tells and what he's got to relate to us today that they have a lot to fear from this man if he ever gets, for instance, into Congress, as one little thought. I get into Congress 2 or 3 times a year, and I can tell you quite honestly, they're wimps. These men in the Freedom Caucus and others are so wimpy, it is incredible. Matt Shea is not a wimp. Matt.
I got to set up the PowerPoint here, and I walk around a little bit, so I'm going to carry this with me. First of all, I really want to talk about the fact that we are not in a pillow fight. We are in a street brawl for the future of our country, and we need to start acting like that. I've met too many Republicans who just want to be nice. Just want to be nice. And when you show them all the evidence, they say, well, I'd rather not know that. Right? Because if you know it, it prompts you to action, right? And you look at what Art just presented, that prompts me to action, that motivates me to action. Because you can't deny it. And so I wanted to start with kind of that idea. The second idea that I wanted to start with as well is that we need to be as intentional as they are. I want to say that again. We need to be as intentional as they are. They have protected economic networks. They have protected influence networks. And they are continuing, I believe. Let's see if I can get that in here. There we go. they are continuing, I believe, to expand and build their networks on a daily basis. And I'm going to give a little bit of what they're doing exactly here in a second at the local level. I want to give a couple war stories, if you guys don't mind, and tell you a little bit about what's happening in Washington State. Just a second, I got to type in a password. Hopefully that comes up. At least I hope so. It's not. I love technology. And I'm supposed to be the generation that knows how to use it. I love it.
Scares some of the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure what's not sure what's going on. Who's the projector person? You're going to have as much trouble as me. Good. All right.
Check the port replicator, make sure it's good.
Jesus.
Will you click on the USB display since it's going through the port replicator?
I'm just going to go ahead and share a few war stories to start then. All right. Sorry about that. It worked when we tested it, as it always does. So, a lot of folks haven't heard the story of what happened with Special Agent Larry Wooten, but I think this is really critical for what we need to do going forward, what the solutions are. And I want to spend a lot of time on solutions today, because a lot of us know what the problem is, but what's the solution? So some of the good news, I want to start with good news. So Larry Wooten was a special agent, and he was overseeing the investigation in regards to the Bundy Ranch in Nevada. And Larry Wooten came out with a memo, and that memo ended up on my doorstep one day, and I went ahead and put it on YouTube and Facebook Live, and it had 250,000 hits on it. And that ended up, that memo, exonerating Ammon Bundy and several others in Nevada. But it was social media that did that. It was the ability to put that out there and go around the mainstream media and get that information out there that really changed the game, I believe. In addition to that, that memo said that Special Agent Dan Love had a kill book in his possession. Quite literally, he bragged about the people that he harassed and badgered so much that they committed suicide. Now, this is public record. Now, was he ever held accountable for that? No, he wasn't, which I think is the next step of holding bureaucrats accountable. I'll give you another story from Washington State. One weekend was Easter. The Chinese flag was flying over the Washington State Capitol. Easter weekend. Okay, now for those of us that are Christian, that has an even greater connotation than just the communist part that is associated with it. So that night, a group of guys that I know from the Army decided that isn't going to stand, and they drove all night long after I told them about this, And they showed up in the morning at about 5 o'clock. And a state patrolman came up to him and said, "What are you guys doing?" And he said, "Well, sir, we are looking for a way to cut that down." And the state patrolman looked up and he said, "Let me go get the keys." If we weren't that organized, we wouldn't have been able to do that, right? To be there when a good patriotic American was on shift to take that down. Now my background, just to start, is my family is 4 generations in Eastern Washington. I'm of Scots-Irish and Irish heritage. We homesteaded up there, helped found the state of Washington, ranchers and loggers. And my dad, when I was growing up, I guess that would be an adverse childhood experience growing up Irish. My dad, when I was growing up, he said, you know, we love this country, we need to give something back to it. And so I went to the United States military and I served in the Armored Cavalry and I also served in the infantry. And I served in Bosnia, I served in Iraq, and I learned over time how the rest of the world actually operated and how precious a thing we had in America. And it's interesting that that same sentiment I am finding in groups of legal immigrants that are coming to this country from former communist states. And so I want to give you an example of that. This year in Olympia, we had several thousand people showing up consistently, not just one time, consistently on various issues. Life, guns, business ownership, all of these things showing up for it. And predominantly they were from the Slavic community, former Soviet Union, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, from the Vietnamese community. Oh, hey, does it work? Could you also plug in that little thing on the side? That's my clicker, that thing will work. From the Vietnamese community as well. These are communities that we should be reaching out to. The Chinese community from downtown Seattle. I'll share 2 stories about that. I'm sitting down at a lunch with some leaders of the Vietnamese community, and they, first question, this is not exaggeration, first question they asked me out of their mouths. Do you know who the head of the local John Birch Society chapter is? Well, actually, I do. I was just stunned. I didn't expect it. And this was the comment. They're the only ones who understand what the threat is and are fighting the communists. Those were their words. Awesome. Yeah, looks like it might. All right, thank you very much for doing that. Let's give him a round of applause. So then the Chinese community came into my office and they had never been to Olympia before, but they came and they said, this country is turning socialist. And they told me a story that they were at a local community meeting. And this community meeting was on this new equal rights initiative called I-1000 to overturn Ward Connerly's great work with I-200 way back in the day. If you don't know who Ward Connerly is, look him up. And Con Chu, he's a leader, he was actually at Tiananmen Square. Okay, so I really hold this guy in high esteem. He said, Matt, we were sitting around the table there and we were talking about how we didn't want I-1000. We were working hard. We came to this country. People had suffered, had saved money, etc., etc. We didn't want to be part of this. And somebody from across the table looked at us and said, you guys just suffer from white privilege. To the leader of the Chinese community. And he went, okay. So that's when he left and came to the office. So we have groups of people around this country who understand what the problem is because they came and they fled from it. Yep. In addition, talk about the USMCA really quick. About 3 weeks ago, we were ending session. One of my fellow members of the Republican caucus stood up and said, hey, I've got a letter for you to sign. Everybody needs to sign this. And it's to tell Congress to vote for the USMCA. And I I didn't expect that to happen at that moment, and so I stood up and I said, can anybody raise their hand that's read it? And of course, nobody in the caucus raised their hands. Well, guys, pay attention to chapter 23, for example, and chapter 30, and this is not something we want to support. The other person stood up and said, well, but it'll help us, keep our agriculture for a few more years. I mean, it was like just grabbing the crumbs off the king's table, and that's all we got left. And so I stood back up and said, we can't act like this. We're Americans. Where does this end? Where will it stop? And so only about 4 members of our caucus ended up signing on to that letter, thank God. Not 130. Give you another incident that happened the other day. What they try to do with us is they try to make us sound like the violent fringe as well. You guys have probably heard that in the media. And so we had 250 people up at a Liberty State rally up in Wenatchee, Washington, and this I-Fiber One reporter comes up to me, and his question was, do you denounce political violence? And I said, nobody associated with me is advocating for political violence, but let me ask you a question. Do you denounce political violence, especially from groups like Antifa? Yeah. And you know what? He refused to answer. And so I asked him again. And then I asked him again, and I asked him again. And I said, okay, we're going to have to end this interview because it appears you're countenancing political violence. I don't. So I don't want to be associated with that. I walked away. This is the type of approach we need to start taking with our media. We need to make them defend their godless communist positions publicly. I don't need to defend being an American. You need to answer why you're going away from the Constitution, why you're going away from our Christian foundations. I think that's what's very important. Mention another one. This is how to approach the media when they come up to you and try to make you sound like a kook because you believe in conspiracy theories. First of all, conspiracy, I got this from Art. Conspiracy is the engine of history. I want you to think about that for a second. Conspiracy is the engine of history. Just a cursory study will prove that. But I had the Stranger magazine came up to me and it says, is it true, Representative Shea, that you believe in Agenda 21? And so my response was, do you mean the 300-page, 30-chapter document entitled The UN Agenda for the 21st Century? Yes, that's a real document. I believe in it. And they had nowhere to go. Have you read it? And clearly they hadn't, right? And suddenly they're getting educated even though they didn't want to be, right? I'll end with this cautionary tale before I get to this. Of all the sessions that I've been down to Olympia, it is the most anti-Christian session that I have ever experienced. I had several people come up to me, accost me on the floor of the House of Representatives, fellow representatives, about my beliefs. I had an ethics complaint filed against me for this. Because it was a conflict of interest for me to be a state representative and yet to go on mission trips to Argentina and Ethiopia, which I do, and preach.
Oh my.
That's how far we've come.
Yep.
Now, it was the head of Indivisible Spokane that filed that, and I'll get to that here in a second, but these stickers on my computer got me in trouble too. I got called into the chief clerk's office. What is dominion? What does Luke 10:19 say? Well, that's where Jesus gave us authority over all the power of the evil one. Didn't know what to do when I said that, right? But think about where we're at for them to feel bold enough to do that. I think the microphone's quit. Think about where we're at for them to be bold enough to start doing that. We're this close to the criminalization of Christians and Jews in America. My wife is from Kharkiv, Ukraine, and they shared a story with me that they always watched the Jewish community because if persecution came to the Jewish community, it was coming to the Christian community soon afterwards, and it was like a canary in the coal mine for them. Well, these are folks, my father-in-law's best friend was sent to the Gulag. His story was written about in a book called A Day in the Life of Ivan Dusanovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. These people lived it. My sister-in-law was broken out of a prison camp twice, once while pregnant over a huge chain-link fence. In fact, I went to look at where these headquarters were when we were there. These people get it. And we need to start reaching out to them and be unafraid to reach out to them in the communities that we're in. All right, let's talk a little bit about flipping districts and what is successful. I've talked quite a bit about that. These are kind of the categories I want to talk about. The hostile media doing their dirty work, but particularly Christian apathy as well. This is a street brawl. In a street brawl, you will be punched. You will be kicked. You will have knives pulled on you. This should not be a surprise to us. And yet people get involved in politics and think that everything's going to be great. They're going to try to go after your job. They're going to try to go after your family. They're going to try to go after all these things. We need to just accept that that's part of life, and America is worth that sacrifice.
Amen.
Amen. Let's talk about Christian apathy. This is from Barna, who's the foremost pollster for Christians in America. 73% identify as Christians. 1% don't have a clue. All right. 75% pray to God. Down here, attend a small group. 16%. That's it. Let's talk about disconnected beliefs. The Constitution requires a government either represent all religions equally or not represent any religions at all. 28% said they didn't know. Phrase separation of church and state, 38% didn't know about that either. Constitution prohibits the government from choosing, supporting, or promoting religious beliefs. Only 22% didn't know. That's a fifth of the country. That's a basic tenet. This is interesting as well. Positive reaction to terms. This tells us, constitutional, our job educating people is working. As a society, it is working. This, religious liberty as well. I'm going to take 3 minutes and prove that this is a Christian nation, because everywhere I go, I have somebody who always tries to say, no, it's not. Okay? And I want you to see the primary source documents for yourself. Some of this you may have seen, some of it you probably haven't. But the very first governing document that connected the colonies was the Articles of Confederation of the United Colonies. The very first sentence reads, whereas we all came into these parts of America with one and the same aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel and purity with peace.
Wow.
That's pretty clear.
Amen.
Then you had Blackstone's commentaries written in 1765 to 1769. Now remember, Declaration of Independence, 1776. In those commentaries, he specifically defined as terms of art, legal terms of art, the law of nature and the law of nature's God. The law of nature being God's truth written into creation, the law of nature's God being Holy Scripture. That's what he wrote, not me. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote those words into the Declaration of Independence, was writing in a legal term of art for the time, saying that this is a Christian nation. So in the 1840s, a guy named Karl Marx, that Art was just talking about, was writing. And people started to question, are we truly a Christian nation in America? So the 33rd Congress actually took it up as a question, launched a formal congressional investigation of both the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. And here was the reports that came out of that. First report by Senator Badger in 1853. Had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and the amendments, the universal sentiment was that Christianity should be encouraged. We are a Christian people. 33rd Congress. No question about it. But then a guy named Charles Darwin started writing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then people were questioning it again. So the United States Supreme Court took this up as an actual case. Are we a Christian nation? And in 1892, in the case of Holy Trinity versus U.S., the United States Supreme Court found, as a matter of fact and law, this is a Christian nation, period. And we are still arguing about this. But if that doesn't convince you, I'll take you to another country who did a study on what made America and the West great. One of the things we were asked to look into was what accounted for the success, in fact, the preeminence of the West all over the world. We studied everything we could from the historical, political, economic, and cultural perspective. First we thought it was because you had more powerful guns than we had. Then we thought it was because you had the best political system. Next we focused on your economic system. But in the last 20 years, we have realized that the heart of your culture is your religion, Christianity. This is why the West has been so powerful. The Christian moral foundation of social and cultural life was what made possible the emergence of capitalism. We don't have any doubt about this. The atheist, communist, Chinese know we're a Christian nation. And we're still arguing about this. So there it is in 3 minutes. All right? Let's talk about the ugly. These are the counter states, the deep state. Now, ultimately, if you get a chance, it would be really good to read Rich Higgins' memorandum to President Trump. It's 5 pages. You find it online. Rich Higgins' memorandum to President Trump. Rich Higgins is and was the foremost expert on irregular warfare in the United States of America. This is the weird stuff, changing dress attire in a village to get them to change their political views, that kind of stuff. He was the #1 expert, still is, I believe, today, in the United States of America. He was put onto the National Security Council as the Director of Policy Planning, and he wrote this memo to President Donald Trump. And Donald Trump read this memo and loved it. Here's what the memo says. The end state is a demoralized movement. Yes, that's what they want to try to do, is demoralize us. They're using a Maoist insurgency model. They're using political warfare in order to seize state power. Okay? The Democrats are what they're using as their main force. The Republicans are the designated defeat mechanism for this movement. Doesn't that really describe it? The
Yeah.
designated defeat mechanism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's talking in military terms, but it's perfect. So, this is the Maoist insurgency model according to Thomas Marx, the mass line. They take one central repository of messaging and they get it across the entire front. All their organizations have the same message across everything. We know that that's true. United Front, you'll see the Islamists, you'll see the Marxists stand on stage together. Really? Quite frequently. It is crazy, right? Because you're thinking, well, don't you guys have opposite values? No, not if you're following the Maoist insurgency model. Then you have military violence. They will have the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, the special section, the Socialist Antifa, or the Socialist Rifle Association, or the Redneck Revolt. How many of you have heard of those organizations? In Washington and Idaho, they're training right now, paramilitary training. That's not making the media at all. Then you have political warfare. We already know about propaganda and infiltration and subversion. When I did my research about what organization was the most effective in the United States of America, the thing that stood out to me about the John Birch Society was it was the only organization that resisted successfully for decades the attempt of infiltration and subversion to destroy it. The only one. Every other organization I found had been infiltrated to some extent. That's why the society is so powerful. Last, international action. We all know about the OIC and the Socialist International, so I won't go into that right now. But I do want to throw up a couple quotes and an important point. Ultimately, both counter-states are controlled by the Marxists. Lieutenant General Mihai Pachipa is the highest-ranking KGB defector to the United States of America. When he came, he admitted that they had sent hundreds and hundreds of KGB agents into the Middle East to infiltrate Islamic organizations, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, so that they could use it as a buffer against the United States of America. And just in case we're unclear, they are communists, they always have been, same symbol. This is locally. Now, if somebody today put up a picture of Adolf Hitler and said resist, right? Would that garner negative media attention?
Oh, yes.
Right, but he's much more of a butcher than Adolf Hitler was.
Amen. Oh, yeah.
Here's communist nationally. This comes from Indivisible. Indivisible is one of the foremost Marxist organizations in the country. You'll notice a couple of things. The high desert of Nevada, communists apparently don't like that. I think there's probably a lesson there. And you'll notice a part of the country, where it's sparsely populated, they don't like to go to those areas. Okay. Just to give you an idea of the communist organizations locally in eastern Washington, the reason I give this to you is there's a similar template in every major metropolitan area around the country. So you can look for this similar thing. So you'll have the center of the beast is the Peace Justice Action League, Spokane. Then you'll see the Spokane Center for Justice. You'll see the Spokane Interfaith Council and some others. But they all have these organizations that are all connected together that do specific different things locally. So if you understand this, you know how to attack it. Now recently the media came after me because I had been doing research and background checks on the leaders of these organizations, which I unashamedly absolutely do. Just to connect these to Indivisible to see these are connected with Indivisible. Connected to the Socialist Alternative of Spokane. They're putting together a peace conference, which isn't about peace. Here is a interesting thing that they did. This is from their 2 conferences, 2015, 2016, the people that they invited. Note this guy, Sean Vestal, Arslan Bukhari from the Council of American Islamic Relations, and as you can tell by my computer, I don't care. Okay? It is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas in America. Separate presentation. Keynote speaker on the other one was Judith LeBlanc. Now in 2017, the keynote speaker was Lisa Brown, who ran for Congress. Okay? So understand these connections, and I'll explain them here in a second. Who's Judith LeBlanc? Leader of the Communist Party USA. Black and white. I already talked about Arslan Bukhari, but let's talk about Sean Vestal. Who's Sean Vestal? Well, he happens to be a reporter for the Spokesman Review, now which aptly could be called the Socialist Review. Sean Vestal also is a donor, and he tried to deny this, and when I put this up on the screen and sent it back to him, he said, oh, you know, you're just never going to listen to the truth. I said, well, it's black and white. Is that not your name, Sean? But this is how tied together the mainstream media and the local socialist organizations are. Let's talk about the Lenin statue everybody always asks me about. So first, that cross is above Colville, Washington. This is Vladimir Lenin. You'll notice his red paint on his hands there. This is in downtown Seattle. The statue. Now I want to tell a story about this. My wife comes from Kharkiv, Ukraine, like I said. During the latest iteration of trouble in the square in downtown Kharkiv, Ukraine, they would come to the square every morning, all the different denominations, and they would pray together for peace over the city. And eventually, that towering statue of Vladimir Lenin that they had in the square, they said, you know, we probably should tear that down. And they did. They tore it down. And you know what they put up in its place? A cross. And those same people are saying, and you guys in America are taking down your crosses and putting up statues of Vladimir Lenin. What's wrong with you? Other local stuff. This is from the Capitol steps in Olympia. They unfurled a communist flag. I started taking pictures. They quickly put it away. But this is real. This was a counter to the pro-life rally that we had there on the steps. We had about 7,000 people on the steps. This was the counter. Then you have Seattle Antifa Action. Nobody gives power. You just take it. Now, if that was the motto of the John Birch Society, do you think they would use that in media publicly? Yes, of course. Right? These people are very violent, and they know we know it. Just to drive that point home, here are some of the death threats that I've received over the last 3 months. The most interesting one, I believe, is the one where the guy says that you and your Nazi friends and family must be eliminated from the face of the earth. Probably needs to reread his quote and look at history. Here's another one, just to drive the point home. I blacked out the bad word down there. What's also interesting is none of these threats have ever been investigated to fruition, unfortunately, by our local government. Let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood briefly, just to show you the area of the country that has the least number of mosques and the area of the countries that they're focusing on. One of them is Texas. Least amount of terrorist attacks in the United States. Notice that looks pretty similar. This is from, I'll skip over that. But here's what he says is the MSA Pledge of Allegiance. The MSA has a chapter on almost every college campus in America, and that is the Pledge of Allegiance he recites. And you'll notice what he says down there, jihad is my spirit. Okay, does anybody know what the definition of jihad is?
Holy war.
It's warfare against non-Muslims. That's their definition, not mine. That comes from the Alliance of the Traveler. So if you have jihad is my spirit, warfare against non-Muslims is my spirit. Okay? So non-Muslims are Christians, right? So warfare against Christians is my spirit. So warfare against Christ is my spirit. Who does that describe? Okay. For those of you that read your Bibles. The next one, and it's interesting, is people say that Islam is a religion. Well, this is the foremost textbook in our schools in America. And here's what it says. Islam is not a religion, okay? It's a theopolitical construct. And it is one that is ripe for the Marxists to use as a vehicle. It's already built into. Here's the meaning of jihad so you can see it, again, from the Alliance of the Traveler. What is a mosque used for? Well, as we found out in Iraq, it's not just a place of worship. It's a military planning place. It also has guns in the bottom of it, etc., etc. Okay? Now, if you don't believe that, that is actually from their scholar, Al-Qardawi, not from me. The Strategic Plan of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, that right document is this in Arabic. Process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. It's a kind of grand jihad by destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their own hand. This is their stated goal, Muslim Brotherhood. To drive this home locally, in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which was the largest successfully prosecuted terror financing trial in the United States of America, the judge found as a matter of fact in law that the North American Islamic Trust was an arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember that name. Who owns the mosque in Spokane Valley, Washington? The North American Islamic Trust. As a matter of fact in law, the Muslim Brotherhood owns the mosque in Spokane Valley, Washington. This probably holds true for a bunch of mosques here in your area. Spokane City Council decided to honor the Council of American Islamic Relations, even though they knew what I'm sharing with you. Our local sheriff went ahead and sat down with them, even though he knew what I'm already sharing. He was briefed on it. In fact, it went so much as to praise them. And this is the kind of disconnect that it's our responsibility to get around. So let's talk solutions. This is where I'm going to spend the majority of the rest of the time. I mentioned this already. No other organization that I know of in the country has remained unspoiled and has remained true to its original mission like the John Birch Society. Period. Nobody anywhere close. There are a lot of people out there that try to smear the John Birch Society, right? But once they learn what it's about, they have two choices. Either act or go back into ignorance and bliss. Okay? And the way that I've seen are these two, that people come to that conclusion. The first is, wow, they wrote that back in the 1970s? That's right. I can't believe it. Then the other one is the New American Magazine, the premier intelligence digest in America right now. If you cannot get somebody to join the society, don't even try, just start with the New American.
That's right, yeah.
Start with the New American.
Thank you.
I mean, it is incredible. I've had legislator friends of mine who have gotten copies of that and said, wow, how come I've never heard of this before? It is so accurate. Then you also have something that's unique, the JBS Bulletin, where we have a nationally coordinated action plan. It's not just figure it out on your own. Here's what we need to go after right now. And you can look at all kinds of different organizations, but no other organization I know of has it that well laid out. Influence network, I want to talk about this. John Silk came up to my area and he said, Matt, I need 10 of your most influential people that you know. I said, how about 130? Okay. And we did two things. First of all, we got them a copy of the New American. Secondly, we did a meeting with the ones out of that group of 130 that were really the influencers of even the influencers. And we met with them, talked about what the society was doing, got them to join, and then started working on the other 130. And what it's turned into is a movement in that part of Washington State and North Idaho. So each one of you, I know you know this, and I know you've probably even heard it before, but organization is so critical to action today. It's so critical. Each one of you know at least 10 people. Most of you probably know 120 like I do. If you can get them along that same path that we used, get them a copy of the New American, have an event with just them, bring in a speaker. Most of us will fly around the country to do this. It's a labor of love. It will change your area forever. Because we've learned that once you get a local chapter and you get about 500 people in an area of 500,000, that area will go in the right direction. It will go conservative. It will go constitutionalist. It will. It's just the way it happens. And 500 people is not a lot, is it? But they are absolutely sold out for the cause. They're willing to get out and act. And particularly, and God, I hope so, they're younger too. They got energy. It will be amazing what happens. And let's talk about that a little bit. How do we vet new leaders coming in? Character, attitude, skills, and habits. What I've noticed traveling around, and even in other countries, it's funny, in other countries they know what's going on in America and they're praying for us. I was talking to some pastors down in Argentina, they're praying for us. If you guys fall, it's darkness. Do you understand that? I mean, they're very adamant about this. They know it. How come we don't? They're looking for us for leadership in this room. And so this part about humble positions too, one of the things that I found is that if you ask somebody to read a certain list of books and they don't read it, they're probably not somebody that you want to put into a leadership position. It's just the way it is. And starting with Shadows of the Deep State. And I'll put up a slide. You can take pictures of it here in a second. It has a list for leaders. But also the other part is the bottom, becoming the media. We've got some great younger people here that understand the value of social media. And like I said, with the Larry Woot memo, we were able to explode that across America and change the course of history just because of a video. Radio shows. I have a radio show up in Washington. I've been doing it for about 10 years called Patriot Radio. You can put it on podcasts and truckers will listen to it as they're driving down the road and they can spread it to their friends and family. I know Duke Pesta is doing that now too with radio and video. We have these things, these tools that get us around mainstream media. And people, believe me, are hungry for this. How many people have you met? They're oh, can you tell me where I can go to get some actual news that's true? And you can point them in the right direction. This last part down here, youth engagement and training, I've been talking to several individuals. Floyd Brown, who runs the Western Center for Media Journalism, Laura Loomer, some other people have been very successful. They said, Matt, if you get together a group of youth, we will train them. They've already committed to it. We just need to get that group of youth together and train them. Get them on our side and train them to push this message out. I'll end with Wolverine leadership as well. And I hope some of this isn't tedious for you because I hope it encourages you and spurs you to some new ideas maybe. So we all know about educating, but I want to talk about wolverines and what they teach us. They've done studies on wolverines. Wolverines are quite a phenomenal animal. They've actually tracked them in all kinds of different circumstances. What they've learned that wolverines always run 3 miles an hour. Uphill, downhill, flat ground, mud, snow, 3 miles an hour. In fact, they tracked one wolverine going up 4,500 vertical feet at 3 miles an hour. That's a tired wolverine when he got to the top. But what does that teach us? We got to run 3 miles an hour. We can't just jump in, oh, it's USMCA, get excited, and then we're done for 2 years. We're running 3 miles an hour. Next thing Wolverine teaches is self-sufficiency. In the wintertime when there's an avalanche, a Wolverine will dig down sometimes 14 feet to get to a carcass that's been buried by the avalanche. And they will eat the entire carcass, including the bones. In fact, some languages they translate as bone crushers. What does that teach us? Well, what I learned in the political arena was that we had to create our own campaign system. We had to create our own counselors. We had to create our own teams, everything completely outside of the existing establishment. We have to be completely self-sufficient with our media, with everything. We have to think that way. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the society is set up to do this already. We're setting up teams now by county in Eastern Washington. And like I said the other day, we had 250 people show up at the first event in the Tri-County area in North Central Washington. And that's how we're doing it. We're being self-sufficient. Also, as part of self-sufficiency, we need to become anti-fragile. What does that mean? When they started to attack my job, went after my bar license, I was already ready for it. I was prepared for it. So the people that are going to be out front, locally, need to be ready for this. And one of the best ways they can be ready for it is to own your own business. Right? They can't come take your own business. They can't fire you if you're not employed by them. Become anti-fragile. Start thinking that way. Because that's how vicious they're becoming. They try to go to my church. But my pastor already knew me because I've been serving for years. I was anti-fragile there. I had multiple avenues of employment. I didn't just depend on the legislature. We need to become anti-fragile. Wolverines also teach us about parenthood. Wolverine dads, they've studied this, will go around and spend exactly the same amount of time with each one of the pups. Who are you mentoring in your life right now? Oh, man, you don't understand. My son went to Austin. I don't know what happened to him. Gracious. Maybe it's not your son or daughter. Maybe it's your neighbor, family friend. But are you mentoring somebody? Just one young person, just one, and passing your knowledge on to them. My mentor was Glenn Dobbs. He's the guy that started the John Birch Youth Movement. Probably a pretty good guy to have mentor you. I was very fortunate because he lived near me. But he invested the time. He sought me out. He said, hey, let's go talk. Let's sit down. Let's have lunch. Are you doing that? And then lastly, proper attitude. Wolverines, they actually have videos of them playing fetch like a dog. They make this kind of little squealing sound, which doesn't fit with my view of a Wolverine, but it's all right. They play fetch. Really friendly, actually. Playful. And if you attack a Wolverine's family, it will rip your face off or die trying. How many times have our families been attacked? How many times have our businesses been attacked? And I was guilty of this. I was guilty of this. And I looked at that and I said, man, whew, I'm glad that wasn't me.
Yeah.
Really awful what happened to that person. Glad that wasn't me. We have to be ready to defend our communities when it happens to our neighbors, not us.
Yes.
And you know what? That doesn't come from me. That comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So I want to thank you very much for having me today. I think I went a little bit over. Here's the slide of what to read if you want to take a picture of that. And then I've got a slide on all the research resources as well. So thank you very much. God bless you guys. Yeah.
Should we know how to get in touch with you, or is there any information on that?
I am fairly easy to find on the internet. But here is the resource slide for research.
Well, your being here and staying with this shows the level of interest in these incredible speakers. It's just amazing to have these two gentlemen up here today. And let's give them a really good round of applause. We have a drawing, and we have a couple of giveaways. And here's the, Matt, if you'll do the honors so they'll know that I didn't cheat.
I don't have a ticket either.
You don't have a ticket either, all right. And we've got Principles of the Constitution. It's a 9-part video series, and the number is?
705-2326.
705-2326. Got it? Somebody, oh, there, Kurt. Hi, you need this, Kurt. And the second number is for a anniversary edition of the journey of the John Birch Society, 60 years.
705-2320.
All right. Well, thank you again for your attendance. Thank you for helping with the seating and everything today, and God bless you and have a wonderful day.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah,
I just finished his today.
There's membership applications up here if anybody needs one.
Pretty intense with students, but I am inviting friends over. They're watching the videos. They're like, oh my God, oh my God.
I wanted to meet you.